All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So we are still doing the Mahr episodes, and we said that there were a lot of things to discuss, but let's just go over really quick. We were talking about the definition of Mahr, we talked about some of its rulings, and we also talked about some of the conditions, and we went in details with the conditions. We said generally that the conditions are supposed to be the same conditions that we would have in transactions. So, what would qualify to be basically a value in order to be, let's say, one change of property, or perhaps maybe even a compensation, or perhaps in trade, then the same thing would actually apply. Then we also went in a slight conversation in that slight conversation slightly talked about some of the details in regards to, well, what about if it was a condition such as to do service? So we went in that and talked about that service piece of it. And we talked about the differences of opinions in regard to a specific legal maxim, which is Shari'atu man qablana, and we went in some details with that one. We also talked about what if what if they were to put a condition such as about what he had memorized in the Quran or from the Quran, and basically what he had already memorized perhaps previously, or is it to memorize more, or all these different things. So that's basically that place of differences. And we talked about the Hanafi madhab and what they regarded in terms of people's integrity going back. And in regards to that hadith, they interpreted that it was fitting in a specific context, and therefore it wasn't necessarily something that they regarded as wrong per se, but they considered that during our times, it's going to be hard to canonize. And that's that word, because al-madhab al-Hanafi, stop here for a second, because al-madhab al-Hanafi, they didn't want to just lay out the madhab itself, but they also wanted to canonize, in other words, to also set it as a legal way in order to be able to rule based on that. So we're talking about the madhab Hanafi wanted a certain fatwa that they are capable of holding accountable the person that is probably not doing it, and therefore being able to retrieve the rights of those that were abused or oppressed. So they found that in doing it as memorize the Quran, are we really going to be, asking the person to go and hold classes and all of that? Or perhaps maybe, start memorizing and start giving it to giving what they memorized, or at least going over what they had memorized with the sheikh and all of that, because at the end of the day you actually want a monetary exchange, at least for the wife, so that's their area of concern, at least. We also talked about the maximum number of mahr and the least number of mahr, and we went in some details with that, and we said that there's no number for the highest number amount of not mahr that you can ask for, but they did debate on the lowest number of mahr. We went in a little bit of that debate, okay, so no need to go over it, and we also left off at this one, the different types of mahr. What do we mean by different types of mahr? So we talked about the mahr being dependent and basically classified, whether we're speaking about when it's paid, how soon it is paid, and whether it is paid in installments or upfront, or all of these different conversations. And we left off at this one, which is mahr al-musamma and mahr al-mithal. We left off at this one, and what it means is that we're talking about a certain mahr that is actually named, and or at least assigned, in a type of mahr that is not assigned. So therefore, we're talking about an equivalent mahr. So that's where we left off at. Let's go to that page and actually check it out. Here we go. Let me just see, where is it? Okay, here we go. And we said in certain cultures, the part about paying mahr upfront or delaying mahr, that's that area that scholars actually discussed in terms of can we actually do that? And this isn't something that is in all cultures, but in some cultures, this is what they do because they want to ask for a certain high amount of mahr, so they may break it into two, one that is upfront or let's say a down payment, and the other one is basically to be paid later when the person has the ability to pay it. And we talked about the common misconception that people would think that he does not have to pay that until he or unless he divorces and or he basically is deceased, and we said that that's not actually true, and that she would have the right to ask for it the second that he basically has that mahr. Okay, and when we went in the scholar's note, and let's see, said يجوز تعجيل المهر وتأجيله. It is permissible to make that mahr be paid, let's say upfront, or even make it to be paid later on. But certainly, when we're speaking about any marriage, we always, even if this mahr was not assigned, even if they did not assign a mahr, then in that situation, we'll ask for mahr al-mithil. Okay, so who and why did they actually do this late mahr and this upfront mahr? In certain countries, especially like countries like the Levant, they have that. In Northern African countries, they don't have that. Okay, they don't have that. They don't even, they're not even familiar with it because Maliki madhab wasn't actually too fond of that. The madhab Shafi'i, they were actually fond of it more. So you could see that this is more common in the areas that would practice madhab Shafi'i, whether we're speaking about the Levant area, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. We have that frequently. In fact, we always have it almost. Barely anybody would actually pay it upfront and full. Let's see. And of course, Shafi'i had said, let's see right there. He said, وَالصَّدَاقُ كَالدَّيْنِ سَوَاءً. And he said, الصداق, meaning the sadaq is basically talking about mahr. It is called sadaq, just like in the ayah. وَذَرَ Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وَآتُوا النِّسَاءَ صَدُقَاتِهِنَّ نِحْلَةً, calls it a sadaq. So sadaq is basically the mahr. And he said, كَالدَّيْنِ سَوَاء. What is كَالدَّيْن? Dain is basically debt. So if the person did not pay it up front, then in that situation, it would basically be something that he owes. It would basically be something that is considered a debt. And of course, al-Mawardi, who also is, of course, he's got this huge, almost, it's almost in 11 or 12 big volumes. Basically, it's called Al-Hawi. In some copies, in some prints, it may go up to 23, but it depends on the print that you have. Anyhow, Al-Mawardi is one of the Shafi'i scholars, and he said in basically explaining this quote right there that that mahr is the same thing as debt. In other words, it can be paid upfront, and it can be paid in installments, and it can be paid in upfront, or at least a deposit and a later payment to be done later on. Of course, Al-Mawardi explained that, and he said, well, لأنه مال ثبت في الذمة بعقد فكان دينا كالأثمان. That كالأثمان, he said, well, since it is basically of value, and basically this is considered of wealth, then in that situation, it would be proven and it would be kept as something that is the responsibility of the other person to pay, and therefore it would be written in the contract and exactly like any other debt that is of value. And of course, there are some scholars that did talk about this belayed and and I guess upfront and deposit and all of that. And from the scholars that actually had permitted delaying paying Mahr is none other but Ibn Taymiyyah. But we know Ibn Taymiyyah is not Shafi'i, he's actually Hanbali. Okay, but you can see that despite all of that, Ibn Taymiyyah was, I would say, an exceptional scholar, to be honest. And Ibn Taymiyyah, just a note, although he's attributed to the Hanbali madhab, but he was a mujtahid. So he wasn't always Hanbali and he had sometimes his own takhrij, his own madhab on many occasions. And some of the opinions were really just exclusive to him. And that confused some, but Ibn Taymiyyah is one of those scholars that really, I would say very controversial according to some, but is one of the greatest scholars ever to live, to many others. But anyhow, let's see. Ibn Taymiyyah, he did prefer that one would actually rush in paying the mahab, just so that the person would follow the sunnah and also the practices of his salaf. Okay, and he basically did not necessarily, see that as something that is against Islam, but did prefer that one would pay it right away. And of course, unless it was noted to be upfront, meaning within the marriage contract. So unless within the marriage contract, it says, yes, this is, let's say, 20,000 to be paid before the wedding, then in that situation, that becomes imperative upon him. Basically, he has to pay it before even the wedding, and therefore it becomes something that, according to Ibn Taymiyyah, it becomes due on that day. Okay, and unless, of course, if there was no specific timing for it, then in that situation, if there's no specific timing, you could see Imam Ahmad, al-Sha'bi, Nakhai, they all said, well, the it would be due, like the final date for it would be in situations of separation slash divorce or marriage resolution or even a death. Okay. And why is that? He said, well, that's because the timing of it is basically right now ending. So there's no point of delaying that. Of course, and just to keep that in mind. And of course, when we're speaking about Mahr, since it is basically something that is a trade, something that is a compensation, all of that. So therefore, we would consider that in situations of perhaps maybe just like in trade, there's a timing for it. Just like, hey, you want to get your property in exchange for whatever money you're giving. So then, therefore, since, hey, the end you took your property, then right now the payment for that is basically due. And of course, in a situation of death or a marriage resolution, it's kind of like, well, this is the end of the contract. This is the end of this, I guess, the trade, if you would want, end of this whole thing. Then in that situation, they considered that that's when its final due date is in a situation of death or even divorce. And let's see, right there, this is quite interesting. You could see Umar Sulaiman al-Ashqar. This isn't Umar Sulaiman, that Palestinian American in Texas. No, this is a different one. This is basically, by the way, he's actually one of his teachers. Okay. And let's see what he said. He said, والصواب من القول أن هذا راجع إلى عرف الناس فالثابت عرفا كالمشروط شرطا. Stop right there. This is extremely important to mention. And he said, and what is preponderant, it basically goes back to the customs that people basically live based on. So what, of course, and the reason for that, maybe he should have put a semicolon right there. We'll put it for him. فالثابت عرفا كالمشروط شرطا. What does that mean? In situations where a condition is not set, okay, is not set in the contract, then in that situation, we would look at the culture. The culture itself, just keep that one in mind because many people, especially the younger generation, they always want to feel that, I don't have to abide by the culture, and especially in a postmodern culture, of course, they're always portraying tradition as basically something that is a paradox to modernity. But of course, that's not what Islam sees. Islam does consider that culture is actually a reference that even Islam and Muslims would go back to because culture is a way of communication. It's a way of how a group of people, they basically organize their relations in a way that isn't necessarily communicated verbally, but it is communicated by, I guess, their customs, common practice. That's what everybody else does. So it became another way of communication. And Islam did consider that and did not consider it as, no, we have to abolish that and we have to somehow deny that, but considered that, no, if it's not against the text, then therefore the text is going to be flexible in taking it in and considering it as part of Islam. So that's why when we look at al-ma'ruf urfan kal-mashruti shartan, whatever is known within the custom, it basically acts as a condition in the contract without even noting it down. So just to keep that one in mind, even if it's not noted as a bylaw, even if it's not noted within the contract, it would still be considered as, hey, it's noted by customs. It's noted by the tradition. So that's basically just keep that one as there, keep that one there. And that's also what Imam Ahmad, he pretty much said the same thing. Al-mutlaqu yuhmalu ala al-urf. And of course, at the same time, you could say that they all went back to considering that, well, this is noted in culture at least this is how they communicated that condition. Okay, so when she gets her mahr, does that mean, and I want you to look at the wording that is used, quite interesting to be honest. I don't like it when you say تسليم المرأة نفسها لزوجها. Kind of, I don't know, it just sounds weird, maybe, I don't know. Let me interpret it literally and then tell you why I don't like it. The word تسليم المرأة نفسها, okay, that a woman would submit herself to her husband, okay? And when you look at taslim, does that mean literally submitting? Well, what does that even mean? Okay, why do I not like it? It actually goes back to a certain definition. Let me explain. In in history, just pause for a second right there, they actually had debated on the definition of marriage. Let me explain why. So they wanted to canonize fiqh. And in order to canonize it, they wanted it to be something that they can fit within a certain definition, within a certain law. So sometimes the wording of those, let's say, legal words that they at least try to do, sometimes it reflects a certain culture, a certain mindset, a certain way of how they view things. So the scholars, many of them, because we're speaking about things like Mahr, that they consider that it takes the same ruling of trade and all of that. So they basically used, in some of them, they, in fact, majority, they defined marriage as حل استمتاع رجل بآدمية, that it is the permissibility of a man basically finding his drives in a halal way in a human female. I know it sounds remember, this is their definition at the time. So you're talking about, the definition rather being very odd. حل استمتاع رجل بآدمية. And what does that mean? And does that make marriage exclusive to somehow, this man finding his drives in this human female? Really? Why would they even define it like that? Let me explain why they defined it like that. So this is to justify and to also, like I said, I'm actually against this definition, but at the time they wanted to, I guess, choose a legal definition to basically judge based on it. So why did they say حل استمتاع? What is halal? So they wanted to basically put that borderline between what is considered a halal relationship and what is considered a crime. So if it is not uh at least that halal mut'a, that halal relationship, that halal let's say satisfying the pleasure in an edamia. Why? Because if it was done elsewhere, whether it is done with same sex or whether it is done in different ways, then in that situation, that would not be considered halal. It would not be considered legal. It would be either zina or it would be incest or it would be maybe, just these different words, etc. So that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to choose a definition that would be used in order to legalize or at least have a foundation for a legal term. Like I said, I don't necessarily like that term because it really empties marriage from a lot of the different things that marriage stands for. But I guess, that was their definition. And certainly that mainly happened in the 5th century Hijriya. That's when you would see they started plagiarizing and copying this same definition from one group of scholars to another, and then they would pretty much stay within the same idea. So when they talked about taslimul mar'ati nafsiha, they basically considered that, well, I mean, if we're talking about mahr as taking the same conditions of trade, then therefore, just like in trade, hey, I pay this much, you basically have to give me the goods that I paid for. So that's why they use these words, which of course to us it rather seems too objectifying, but of course, I don't blame you. You can see it that way. That's okay. I see it that way myself, that it's rather too objectifying. But at the same time, I mean, there's no question that once the woman is married, that ta'at al-zawj and obedience to the husband is basically one key thing that we know is in marriage in Islam. And yes, the word is obedience. And I know that a lot of those that are, the feminists, they absolutely hate that word and feel that it's objectifying women. But of course, they don't have a problem with saying, obeying laws or obeying the boss's rules. And, but then when it comes to the husband, that's when they start getting, anaphylaxis and all of a sudden an allergy reaction right there. But But at the same time, we have to remember that it's best in order to make sure that we're not influenced with all these different, I would say, cultural influences, whether that was from the liberals or whether that was from, I guess, maybe postmodernists or perhaps maybe feminists or perhaps maybe culture, etc. And yeah, so okay, let's see. He said the scholars actually agreed that a woman is obligated to submit herself to her husband, but just to mention, this is after the wedding. So this is after the wedding. This isn't before the wedding because the wedding is basically that announcement. In fact, I think we talked about this before. For the Malikis, they considered the wedding obligatory. In fact, they considered the wedding a pillar because they considered that that is al-ishhar in itself. That is al-ishhar. They did not consider the two witnesses that were there probably during the time of the marriage contract as necessarily the witnesses, the valid witnesses. They considered that the valid witnesses are going to be those that are attending this walima. So that's why in the North African countries, you would see, because they're Maliki madhab, you would see that they would do the marriage contract 2 days in advance, basically 2 days before the wedding, 2 or 3 days, and then they would do their henna and their, just different celebration, and then basically 3 days later, that's when the actual wedding is happening, and then of course they would move in together. Okay. And certainly, he said, and it is not permissible to delay basically the husband having the right to be intimate with his wife. Let me explain something. What if she refuses and he insists? Is that considered, or let's say he imposes himself on her? Is that considered marital rape? Let me pose the question to all of you and see what you ladies think. Is it considered marital rape or not? What do you say? Whoever wants to answer, you can go ahead, unmute yourselves. Everybody's trying to answer the question. Okay, let me explain it. This is the time that Islam had considered that this is when the consent had happened. This is when the consent had happened. So in Islam, there is no such thing as a marital rape because the consent happened on the day of the marriage contract. And in Islam, we basically would consider a crime when we have solid evidence for it. And since there is a marriage contract, there is an agreement for this taslim, for this basically this relationship that it would be permissible, then there's no such thing as marital rape because the consent happened back then, which would include all the times. But number one, it is not permissible for the woman, if her husband basically asked to be intimate, it is not permissible for her to refuse unless she basically had some medical reason to refuse. So we're talking about a medical reason, maybe, hey, or a religious reason. Let me talk about the religious reason. Religious reason such as she has her period. Okay, that of course she cannot be intimate, or at least penetration, at least, okay, that would be not permitted. And intercourse, of course, not permitted, but everything else is permitted as foreplay, and unless we're speaking about within that area. Okay, that's the only thing that's not permitted. So she has the right to say, no penetration, at least, but then other things are permitted, and it would be haram to refuse. Okay, so that's the religious reason. What about medical reason? Medical reason, let's say she was postpartum, at least not necessarily postpartum to actually mean nifas, but to mean that her doctors recommended that because she probably had an episiotomy or something, that recommended that she would not be intimate because of the stitches, or perhaps because she, let's say, some kind of a medical procedure, and therefore this can rupture, can harm her in different ways, then she could definitely say, sorry, no. Absolutely not, because of my health reasons. So in that situation, she can actually refuse that and insist on refusing, in fact, and in situations that, he will say, well, she prevented me from my rights, etc. Will say she had a medical reason, sir. I hope you understand. Okay, so in that situation, that's different. Okay, because why? Because in the general rule, لا ضرر ولا ضرار, harm is to be completely eliminated in Islam. So if we're talking about a medical harm, we're talking about, let's say, psychological harm. So let's say she's going through a psychological situation where perhaps I've had women that come to my office and they went through a type of child molestation or probably, a rape attempt, or they were raped as young girls. And then once, they wanted to get married, but then they thought that everything was going to be fine. But it wasn't until the day of the day of their wedding, on that day when it was basically time, or at least it was time for the first intimacy, that's when her PTSD reacted, and then she panicked and felt that, uh-oh, it's another rape attack. And then she basically got into this type of an attack and felt that she needed to defend herself and completely lost the whole situation of what is going on, and that this isn't another rape episode. But then she reacted. So in that situation, we would say, wait a minute, let her heal first before we would get into the situation into the situation of getting her perhaps in a case where it is worse than before. So then in that situation, we would deal with mental issues the same way that we would deal with physical issues. So whether this is a mental situation or a mental disorder that she's going through, or whether this is a physical disorder, it's going to be treated the same way. We need this person to heal first, and therefore we have to do I would say this education, because I've had the strangest case. Really, it was a woman that had something vegetamous. So, think of it as when you blink, if something gets near your eyes basically just blink without, involuntarily, basically. And that's the same thing that with vegetamists, she basically, anything that may get near her vagina, basically, it just basically closes. And they were married for 4 years. For 4 years, never were they intimate. Now, everybody else sees them that they're happily ever married, just a happy couple. But then, unfortunately, the man insisted that she was just being a bad wife, did not want to give her husband his rights and all of that, when it was basically just that vegetamous, that he refused that it would be get that it would get traded, and he completely refused that there was anything of that sort. And really, this is a lack of education. And even when the doctors tried to explain to him, he insisted that, no, no, I don't even want to hear any explanation, and insisted that she would not get a treatment. And he insisted that there was no such thing. And this is just going to cost me too much to go through any type of therapy. And I know that New Jersey has this therapy as well. And they were really successful in many cases, not in all cases. But again, this is just an example of how sometimes the lack of education can sometimes be a price that the wife might pay sometimes. And well, of course, he's paying the price as well. You're married, but you're not married. So just imagine that. All right. So when we say about that education, just keep that one in mind, that there are circumstances that sometimes we just have to know which resources to knock at in order to get the therapy that we need, before we would just say, hey, it's obligatory. But of course, they would say obligatory in We're talking about the normal situations, not those cases where they would be completely different in their circumstances, in their situations. Just a note on that. Okay, let's see. What if um, and of course, what if she were to prevent him basically from his sexual rights? That would be considered a sin unless this was before the wedding. Because if this was before the wedding, definitely do not be intimate before the wedding. And this happens a lot. Do not be intimate before the wedding, not even the first kiss, not any of the foreplay. Do not do that. Trust me, you will become cheap in his eyes. Simple as that. Very, it's so common that women think that, oh, if I don't give him anything, then he's not going to come back to me and he's probably going to give up on me. The answer is absolutely not. Absolutely not. You become more valuable when you are hard to get. That's basically the men's mindset. When you're hard, the harder you are, it becomes something that, I want to achieve it. That's why you would see more boys wanting, I guess, to play, and in different games because they're more hooked on games than girls. Okay, girls are more into social media than boys, and boys are more into gaming because challenge is what they like. Challenge is what makes them, I guess, stay committed that I want to get there. Okay, so girls, do not sell yourself for cheap. Wait until the marriage contract and the wedding, and then certainly get into, inshallah, that relationship when you are basically securing your rights, securing your identity, your value, securing also your dignity. Okay, don't rush. Don't let anybody make you feel, blackmail you that if you don't give me what I want, I'm going to walk away. Don't let that happen. Don't let that happen. Okay. Let's see. What if she said, no, not until you would give me the late Mahr. There are two situations. Number one is that unless the late Mahr was mentioned that it would be by a specific date, then she can wait until that specific date. Okay. But if it was not set at a specific date, then she would have to basically be intimate with her husband if that's what he wishes. And we're speaking about after the wedding here, even if he did not pay the delayed mahr since it was not put on a specific due date. Okay, when does the wife have the right to actually ask for the whole mahr? Okay, number one is that if he divorced her after basically being intimate with her. Okay, so after being intimate, he divorced her. So she would have the right for the whole mahr. Why? Okay, why? Because there's no differences of opinions between scholars as based on this ayah. Based on this ayah, وإن أردتم استبدال زوج مكان زوج وآتيتم إحداهن قنطارا فلا تأخذوا منه شيئا أتأخذونه بهتانا وإثما مبينا وكيف تأخذونه وقد أفضى بعضكم إلى بعض وأخذن منكم ميثاقا غليظا. So let's translate this ayah, and if you wish to basically change one, well, this is talking about, spouses basically right now. Right now, this person is not interested in this person, and therefore they want to remarry someone else. And if you would give any of them qintara, a large amount of money, qintara would basically would talk about treasures, then you cannot take anything from it. And would you take it? And this isn't an interrogative clause, but this is actually displaying a type of it's tashniya. It's basically to display that this is an unacceptable behavior. أَتَأْخُذُونَهُ بُهْتَانًا وَإِثْمًا مُبِينًا? Are you really taking something that is nothing but blasphemy and a major and an out and it's like an ithman mubina. It's a straightforward sin. It's a straightforward transgression. How would you take it when you had, the word is أفضى بعضكم إلى بعض, when you had uncovered or exposed one another? You exposed, yourselves to one another. Well, what does exposing have to do with anything here? Well, this ayah is actually wanting to display adab in reminding the husband and wife that at one point they had exposed, we're not just talking about physically, but it is reminding them that you had one day been together as one body and exposed a lot about yourselves. So therefore, consider those moments that one day you basically had a deep relationship. So based on that deep relationship, just remember that one day you had a warm relationship. You were together in one bond. So that's why this ayah says, وَقَدْ أَفْضَى بَعْضُكُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ. One day you trusted her, she trusted you, and she basically had taken from you مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا. You basically were both in a strong bond, in a covenant that was considered a very strong relationship and a strong bond. And therefore, the last thing you would want to do is just forget those times when you were really trusting each other. You trusted her, she trusted you, and therefore just remember at least not to blackmail, not to hurt the other person, because there was one time and there was a lot that you both had basically trusted one another for. So just remember that piece of it. So this ayah is also reminding the husband specifically. That's why it said أَخَذْنَ مِنْكُمْ. This is reminding the husband mainly, more than the wife, that she basically submitted herself to you. She basically wanted to really be there for you wholeheartedly. So do not abuse her financially, because she gave you more than the money that you are right now probably thinking to somehow figure out a way to somehow abuse her with, or probably take it away. She had given you more than that money. She had given you herself. She trusted you with her own body. She trusted you with everything, and to the point that she was committed in everything. And for a woman, it's not easy to just trust anybody. It's not easy to just be there, and expose and you just, just take off your hijab. It's so hard for her that she just cannot just even be intimate unless she really feels that security. And she was feeling that security from you. She was feeling that she was trusting you. She was feeling at one point that she was willing to be all yours. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding him that even if they had basically you had given them a qintara, you probably paid all the money. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not take anything from it. And if you were to take it, then that would be a blasphemy, a major lie, and it would be a major transgression. And it's so common. It is so common that we would see many husbands, playing the game of right there, just saying, oh, she's nashes, therefore she wouldn't get the mahr, she wouldn't get her nafaqa and nothing and all of that. And it's so sad that many can find ways to manipulate the text, to manipulate themselves, to basically harm the woman and give themselves the justification. But at the end of the day, just remember, عند الله تجتمع الخصوم. Before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those that had harmed these women and they abuse that they don't have the ability to fight for themselves, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be the one to fight for them. Okay, let's continue right there. So what about that khalwa that happens? Okay, now here's one thing. If we're speaking about that khalwa, you had a group of scholars that basically from al-Hanafi, the Hanbali, they basically had said even if there was a khalwa, okay, let me explain the word khalwa. So the word khalwa basically means that they are in a place that is a closed area, no one there, and they had, whether you're speaking about the opportunity, the availability, you're talking about the possibility to actually be intimate. Okay, now, just that, khalwa. And we know that the hadith is really clear that no woman can be alone with a man. No woman can be alone with a man in a closed door unless it is a mahram or basically a husband, right? Unless it is a mahram or a husband. But other than that, it would be haram for a woman to be in a closed room, in a closed space, or even if it's a space, let's say they're sitting together in, I don't know, in a restaurant, sitting together in a restaurant. Yeah, well, everyone's there. Yes, everyone is there, but these people don't even know who you are, don't even know why you guys are there, and they would not act as an obstacle from you, both of you being together, probably in a car and going to a hotel. So it is technically a form of khalwa. So to say, well, we were together at a restaurant or etc., but it would be, is it necessarily that khalwa? Are we talking about a khalwa where perhaps in a car, maybe together, maybe, I don't know, they were in the car together and then perhaps maybe decided to park their car in a nearby, I don't know, forest or no one's there, etc. That's considered a khalwa. That's considered a khalwa. Now, does she have the right to ask for all the mahr for this khalwa? They might have touched, they might have, not been intimate, let's say completely intimate or at least penetration. None of that happened, but they had at least a moment of romantic relationship. Then in that situation, you would say the Hanafi and the Hanbali madhab, they would say, yes, she has the right for all the mahr, just for that moment. And therefore, guys, that way, you need to make sure that, what, I'm not going to be paying the price for this, all the mahr, just because you stayed with me in some area and probably held hands and etc. And even though I didn't actually get intimate with you, but then I would have to pay the whole mahr. You're going to pay the price for it, so make sure you don't do it. Okay, let's see. For the Maliki and the Shafi'i, and of course, you got some other scholars, they basically said, well, no, just for the khalwa, that does not mean that he has to pay all the mahr. Certainly, we don't advise it, but they said the whole mahr would only be in a situation of penetration, of intimacy. Ustaz Umayya, go ahead, dear.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Alaikum
barakatuh.
salam.
Do you mean that the khalwa, they did it in the forest, like for that they are during their ملكة or كتب الكتاب or after
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah. After the marriage contract, this isn't some guy, having, I don't know, a boy and girlfriend relationship. No, no, this is after they had done the marriage contract,
marriage contract but before the الدخول
before the wedding. Yes.
wedding. Okay, جزاك الله خير.
Yep. So this is after there's there's
But
no question
yeah,
that a girlfriend and a boyfriend, basically, I don't know, going to some forest or whatever it is, that she would get the mahr just for that. But
no, no,
you
no. This
wrote
is
yourself a cheat.
this is zina. There is no
This
contract
is zina.
between them.
This is
But
zina.
for this couple, after they make the marriage contract, that means that he anytime without the marriage party or wedding party, she is his
Right.
wife. But
So,
if they
okay.
divorce, you mean if they divorce, they have
Okay. So
yes.
let me explain.
Okay.
So after the marriage contract, if they had a marriage contract and they decided to break up, they would call it break up, but Islamically it's called a divorce.
Okay.
Okay. Islamically, since there's a marriage contract, this is called a divorce. Now, when you look at the marriage contract, but they still didn't do the wedding yet, this is that moment that I'm talking about if there is khalwa or if there isn't a khalwa. That's what I'm talking about. They did a marriage contract and they had a khalwa. Then she, according to the Hanafi and Hanbali scholars, they said she would get all the mahr. According to the Malik and Shafi'i, they said no, she doesn't get all the mahr. So they said all the mahr would only be in situations of intimacy. Okay. Now here's one thing. In Madhab al-Hanafi, they said an extra condition. They said, I don't want to just any type of a khalwa. They said what we mean by khalwa is basically what would basically be absent, whether we're speaking about as tab'an or shar'an. What does that mean? So if they were in the restaurant, not in a forest, okay, in the restaurant, and of course, in the restaurant, there's, dad was in the parking lot, so he was really sure that they didn't go anywhere. And but they were together in the restaurant. They had a marriage contract. They were together in a restaurant. So he was like, I'll just stay in the parking lot. You guys can go to the restaurant, and they asked for their foods and all of that. But of course, technically, there's nothing that they could do in a restaurant. Even if they were to go to the bathrooms, I mean, there's a girl's bathroom and a boy's bathroom, so there's nothing that they can do. Okay. So in that situation, for the Hanafis, they regarded that this is not khalwa. Okay. For the Hanafis, they said, well, this is a mana taban. And shar'an, and she also had her period on that day. So there's another thing. So that is a mana shar'i. She was also basically on her period on that day, or perhaps even some kind of an illness that prevented basically any form of intimacy, whether from his side or from her side. Let's say he had some kind of a, I don't know, some kind of a let's say dialysis. I don't know if that prevents it. I don't know, or probably some kind of an illness that would prevent him from being intimate. And they were going through treatment, whatever. Okay. Or even from her side as well. Okay. Such as, I want you to look at these words right there. And of course, during that time, it was kind of strange. I don't know what they did about it, but at that time, these are all deformities. And of course, these deformities, they do happen, but at the time they didn't have a cure for it. And they wouldn't know that it's there until a day of basically their marriage happens. So what is القرن الرتق and الحيض والإحرام, etc.? القرن is basically, it's a deformity, and it's basically a certain deformity that is of something blocking basically the vaginal opening. So like a bone or something. And ratq is basically when something, so do you remember like vaginimus? Ratq is like vaginimus. It's basically the whole tissue is blocking it. Okay, so what do they do in situations like that? I don't know what at the time they did at that time. I don't know what they were doing, but during our time, they basically do
Sure.
surgery. The OBs, they have their own techniques of treating these cases. I've had a case, I'll never forget that. Um, so what she did was an FGM. And of course, we know that Islam is against FGM, but had permitted at least prepusectomy. Islam permitted prepusectomy, but forbid FGM. What's the difference? Female genital mutilation is basically when you are literally cutting the clitoris. Okay, and that's actually against Islam. But the prepusectomy, it's basically like a slight uh, cut for what is called the prepuce. It's basically a small area that acts as the foreskin for the male part. So that's basically that prepusectomy that Islam had permitted. But anyhow, so they had done a complete FGM, and with this complete FGM, because the skin basically healed and blocked the whole pathway basically to her vaginal area, and it made it basically going to be nearly impossible without a tear if any penetration were to happen. So she called me up and she said, "What is the ruling on making?" And of course, the doctors had told her that there is a way to basically, correct it to a certain level where it is not basically tearing and is not painful during penetration. So at the time, when she called me, she told me, this is the situation, didn't know what to do. So I told her that it would be permissible to have that basically restored medically. And then of course, alhamdulillah, she did restore at least to heal it in a way that it is not harming her when she gets married. And alhamdulillah, mashallah, she had 4 children after that. And I remember her calling me. It felt so good, that alhamdulillah, all of that is restored, and alhamdulillah had 4 children after that, and even went to live in Medina. Um, SubhanAllah, I mean, wow, and that was how long ago? So her children are right now probably 17, 18. All right, let's see. What about things like ihram and fasting Ramadan, or they're in Ramadan? I don't know what they were doing during Ramadan in a restaurant, but all right. So I guess they were just, it doesn't have to be a restaurant. Maybe they were in school or whatever, or even Salat al-Fard. Okay. Let's see right there. He said, كلام الحنفية صحيح إذا وجد شخص ثالث وكان في مكان لا يصلح للخلوة. أما إذا كان أحدهما مريضا أو صائما صوم فرض أو حاجا فالخلوة صحيحة ويتحقق بها الدخول، وهذا مذهب الحنابلة. That's that debate where is it possible that there can and could have been any form of intimacy right there. So of course, he was basically commenting on the Hanafi madhab, and he said if there was a third person or they were in an area that would not be possible to basically have a complete khalwa. And of course, this is really, you could say that they were really also referring to foreplay here. So this is something where you could say one is ill or the other one was probably fasting, Sawm al-Fard. So we're not talking about Siyam Sunnah on Monday or Thursday, but we're actually talking about Siyam Fard, that, this isn't something that he would be giving up on, or even during Hajj. So they were doing Hajj. He was in a state of ihram. He wasn't going to do anything because لا رفث ولا فسوق ولا جدال في الحج, and no any type of rafath, any type of a foreplay, any type of even flirtation is permitted during ihram. So when a husband and wife, you are basically in a situation of ihram, no flirtation is permitted, whether there was let's say, a complete marriage or just a marriage contract. Any type of flirtation is not permitted during ihram, let alone any type of foreplay or any type of intimacy. Okay. And therefore, he basically said, well, then in that situation, yes, that would be a khalwa sahiha, and therefore she would have the right for all the mahr, according to the Hanafis. Okay, let's see. And what is the evidence? I'm just going to go really quick because I don't want to spend so much time on this. Majority or all the scholars of the Sahaba, they said that if somebody closes the door, or even arkha sitra, what is arkha sitra? That the time they didn't necessarily always have doors. So sometimes they would have like curtains. And if the curtain is there, they would know that, oh, you're not supposed to enter. In that situation, that would be a type of khalwa. And therefore, it would be obligatory to pay all the mahr. And at the same time, ladies, there would be a iddah that you would have to observe. Okay, what is the evidence? They said, we've got another evidence. The ayah says, وَقَدْ أَفْضَى بَعْضُكُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ. So the first group of scholars, or this group of scholars, they basically had seen the word أفضى as metaphorical and not necessarily as literally expose one another, but this is giving me the inference that there is some form of a relationship where you were capable of being exposed to one another. Okay, so that's that word. They said, well, afdha is not necessarily to refer to intimacy, but it can refer to any form of khalwa, any form of perhaps maybe exposing one another. And since the word afdha is actually derived from the word, or at least coming from the whole word of al-fada, meaning space, and basically an empty space. So therefore, if they were exposed to one another, that means they had their own space. That means they had their own freedom to do different things. Okay, let's see. And for those that did not consider that being in a situation of khalwa, for those that didn't consider that khalwa without intimacy, that they would basically be considered as exactly like if they were intimate, and therefore she would not have the right to all the mahr. Well, they said, listen, we've got our evidence too. What's your evidence? They said, well, right here, as for the ayah, they said, yes, the word afda, but we know the inference is, according to them, the inference is it's actually referring to intimacy. That's what they said. And they said, and same thing. We have another word for you. The ayah says, وَإِن طَلَّقْتُمُهُنَّ مِن قَبْلِ أَن تَمَسُّوهُنَّ وَقَدْ فَرَضْتُمْ لَهُنَّ فَرِيضَةً. And the other ayah, we've got the evidence for it, they said. We said, well, the ayah says, and if you divorce them before you would even touch them. And they said, when you actually talk about touch, well, this isn't talking about just a simple tap, but this is actually talking about without intimacy. This is talking about the type of a relationship where there is no intimacy basically happening. And of course, that's that debate. How do we explain this one? Is this metaphorical? Is this metaphorical, or is this literal? what do we mean by that? And of course, just to keep that one in mind. And then in that situation, of course, for the woman, she's going to say, no, I'm going to believe if I'm going to get all the mahr, I'm going to be getting what? I'm going to be getting a good, perhaps maybe $30,000 if I were to, I don't know, take photos and show photos that, hey, we were in this closed place one day and we took photos, and here it is, and showed it to the qadi. And she said, yeah, I deserve all the mahr. And she brings this ayah and brings that ayah. And the Qadi says, yeah, I know, nice try, but I actually take the other madhab in this regards, and therefore you only get half the mahr, or you get no mahr at all. Uh-oh. Should we fight the Qadi and say, but no, you were supposed to, this is what is preponderant. Sorry, but this Qadi has the right to consider one opinion as preponderant, and therefore it would be imperative upon you to take that opinion as basically the final, opinion to basically bring a solution to this debate right there. And the other situation where she would deserve, or at least have the right to ask for all the mahr, in a situation where one of the spouses would basically die, even if there was no intimacy whatsoever. Wait a minute, for real? Yeah, let's see. In that situation, of course, the wife would have all the mahr if, number one, qad summi, it was assigned. She would get $30,000 in mahr, for example, or if it was not mentioned, then in that situation, she would get the equivalent mahr, mahr al-mithl, equivalent mahr. What does that look like? We're going to ask her family from her dad's side. What is the average of mahr on your family's side, on your dad's side? And she would say, well, the average mahr, they were asking for $25,000. Okay, that's going to be your average mahr. That's going to be your mahr. But it wasn't mentioned in the contract, and he should pay me more. Why? Because I have a degree in internal medicine. No, your average mahr in your family, regardless of your degree, your average degree, you should, if it was mentioned in the marriage contract, then that would end the dispute. But since it wasn't mentioned in the marriage contract, then therefore we're basically going to consider mahr al-mithl based on your family side. Okay, and of course, that is the madhab Hanafi and basically the madhab Hanbali as well. But I want you to look at this one. He said, وَصَحِيحُ مَذْهَبِ الْحَنَابِلَةِ. What do you mean Sahih madhab al-Hanabila? What is Sahih madhab? What does the Hanbali madhab say? Okay. Al-madhab al-Hanbali was not a madhab. What was it? What was it? Ahmad ibn Hanbal was not even a scholar of fiqh. So how did the Hanbali madhab come about? Al-madhab al-Hanbali was really later generated. Ahmad ibn Hanbal was more of a muhaddith than a faqih. It doesn't mean he wasn't a faqih, but he was more of a muhaddith than a faqih. So the opinions of Ahmad ibn Hanbal were later based on the legal maxims that he had considered. Later scholars, they basically, I guess, classified and managed to make a number of different, I guess, combining the different fiqh opinions that he had. And then it was known and commonly known later on. So even when you look at Dawood al-Zahiri, he would never discuss madhab Hanbali. Why? Because it didn't exist. And we're talking about the 5th century Hijrah, okay? Because it didn't exist. It didn't exist. Well, wait a minute. Ahmad ibn Hanbal died 265 Hijriya, right? Somewhere around there, 265 Hijriya. And yet the madhab Hanbali didn't really generate until 5th and 6th century Hijriya. Why? Because it wasn't until the later scholars they managed to, I guess, trace the Ahmad ibn Hanbal's point of views and his ijtihadat and his fiqh. And then, of course, even within those that wanted to follow his school, they basically had a dispute on really what is the madhab Hanbali, what would be considered the Hanbali, or those that wanted to use the legal maxims for the Hanbali school, what would be basically that stance. So that's why they debated all of that. Let's see. Imam Malik, what did they say? Imam Malik and Shafi'i, they basically considered, well, if any of them died before being intimate, Shafi'i and Malik, they said, well, she would not have the right to inherit. Why? They said because this basically happened before being intimate, and therefore she would not even have the mahr, just like if we're talking about talaq. Wait, in talaq there's no mahr? So they said, well, just as if there was a marriage resolution, a divorce, even and before intimacy, they had a marriage contract, and then they went into some disagreement, and before even intimacy, and then this person decided to divorce his wife, then in that situation, she would basically not have the right for the mahr. She would not have the right for the mahr. So what is the situation then? They said, well, that's the same thing. We're going to do this analogy, the same thing. If the husband or the wife were to die before intimacy were to happen, then in that situation, there would be no mahr to be paid. Just like talaq. It's the same thing. They said it's the same thing. It's a marriage resolution due to divorce or due to death. And this marriage resolution happened before even any intimacy. They said it's the same thing. Well, why are we going to say that there's going to be a mahr to be paid? Al-mahr is basically, according to the Shafi'i and Maliki, they said al-mahr is to be paid for intimacy. That's the whole object according to them. All right, so for Umar Sulaiman al-Ashqari basically considered that the preponderant ruling is the first opinion. Which one? The Hanafi and the Hanbali. What was that? That she would have the right to basically get all the mahr in case that even though they were not intimate. So let's give a scenario. Ahmad and Khawla, they both had a marriage contract. Okay? Both had a marriage contract. Ahmad gets into a car accident. They were never intimate whatsoever. In fact, their wedding was supposed to be on a certain day, and before they were even capable of celebrating their wedding, he basically gets into a car accident and dies. Uh-oh. We go to Khawla. Khawla, were you intimate at all? No, we never had any of that. Was there any khalwa at all? Well, just to avoid the dispute, no, there was no khalwa. Okay, does she get the mahr? Does she get even that fard, meaning that inheritance? So for the inheritance, she does inherit. We're going to talk about the differences of opinions right there. For the mahr, she, according to the Hanafi and the Hanbali, yes. According to the Hanafi and Hanbali, yes, she gets the mahr. But she said that there was no khalwa, there was none of that. Yes, according to the Hanafi and Hanbali, she would get the mahr, and she would get inheritance too. But there was just a marriage contract. Yes, that's enough. To the Maliki and Shafi'i, they said no, she doesn't get, well, she doesn't get the mahr. And because this is exactly like talaq. And let's see, what's the evidence on that? And of course, let's say there's a hadith that was narrated by, let's see, who was it? Sunan al-Tirmidhi, Marwah Sunan al-Tirmidhi right there. Well, Rawah al-Tirmidhi right there. That Ibn Mas'ud, that he was asked about a man who got married to a woman and did not give her basically the mahr and was not intimate with her until he had died. So Ibn Mas'ud basically said she would get the amount of mahr that is equivalent to other women without any basically lessening from the amount or even exceeding the amount. And therefore, she would also have to do al-iddah. Al-iddah, like 4 months and 10 days? Yes, we were talking about a guy that just died. Okay, 4 months and 10 days of iddah. Wait a minute, so the iddah for a woman, her husband died. What is she supposed to do? Like wear black and all of that? No, 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 no. Color does not matter whatsoever. Okay, so what is she supposed to do? She would be basically avoiding, and this is al-hidad, she would be avoiding any type of cosmetics. Any type of cosmetics, like any type of cosmetics. She would not get engaged whatsoever and not even talking about it. Okay, for 4 months and 10 days. And we're talking about lunar months. And she would only leave her house only for necessity. So she would stay at home? Yes, she would stay at home. Well, when you say necessity, is school counted? School is counted. Is going to her work counted? It's counted. What about getting groceries? Yes, it's counted. What about her best friend is getting married and it's a special day and it's wedding? No, that's not that's not a necessity. Necessity is something that relates to, for perhaps maybe her job. She needs the income to cover her expenses, or perhaps maybe go to a doctor's appointment. That's necessity. All the rest is a sunnah. If it's a sunnah, then no. It's a sunnah to be there for your best friend's wedding. That's a sunnah. Do not go. But what if she was feeling so hurt, she was feeling so sad and just needed, just some time off, basically to just walk around the park, for example, to just, yes, you can do that during the day, not during the Maghrib time and above, not during the Maghrib time or Isha time. You can do that during the day, but not before. Does she have to wear something like black and niqab and all of that? No. Niqab is a sunnah anyways. It's not a fard, according to some scholars. Other scholars, they consider it fard, but just a note. Okay. And what about wearing black? Wearing black is culture. Has nothing, even outside, wearing black is culture, not religion. All right? Hijab does not have to be black whatsoever. Doesn't have to be black. It's culture, not religion. It's preference, not religion. Okay? Whatsoever. It's their preference, maybe in Saudi, maybe in Qatar, in those countries. It's their preference. That's not religion. Religion does not specify a specific color. Say that Aisha wore red, wore yellow. That's permissible. Doesn't have to be black, just a note. Okay. And for those that had said, lacking beautification, all of that, for al-hidad, those are all the scholars. Al-hidad is a must. So we're talking about anything that acts as cosmetics. Jewelry, makeup, exaggerated, glitter and whatever it is on clothes, all of that, that's basically not permitted during the time of mourning due to the husband's death. Okay, so that's the 4 months and 10 days. وَلَهَا الْمِيرَاث. And she would even inherit. So if he had a good amount of money and this guy was rich, okay, even though they didn't really live together, she would get inheritance. Yeah, right there. Inheritance right there. Okay, let's see. And it's the same thing. Hold on. What are we looking at? Let's look at this hadith. And where is it? You just said رواه الترمذي في سننه عن ابن مسعود. You didn't say. You didn't give me the reference for it. Just that. Okay, let's see. And Ma'qal ibn Sinan, he basically said, قضى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في بروع بنت واشق. A woman, basically, بروع بنت واشق, when, of course, well, this is completing the story, Ma'qal ibn Sinan, he basically went to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and he said, when Abdullah ibn Mas'ud basically said, well, she would get the equivalent of the Mahr and she would have to do the iddah and basically have the right for inheritance. He said, well, the Prophet ﷺ had also made the rule for one of the women in our family. Her name was Buru' bint Washiq, and she was basically a woman, and women that her husband basically died before they were intimate, and that the Prophet ﷺ had made the exact ruling that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud had made. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was very happy about it because his fatwa was more of his own, I guess, evaluation, his own derivative, but he was happy to know that it traces back all the way to the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, and Tirmidhi had said, Hadith ibn Mas'ud, Hadithun Hasanun Sahih. So therefore, it's an authentic hadith and therefore a reference to go back to. But here's one thing. Look at this one. هذا الحديث لم يبلغ الإمام الشافعي بإسناد صحيح. الإمام الشافعي didn't actually know about this hadith in an authentic narration. So that's why you could see الإمام الشافعي توقف عن القول بمقتضاه. Why didn't Imam الشافعي just take that opinion and say that she doesn't get mahr, she doesn't get the inheritance, and with this hadith right there, why do you just take that hadith? Well, because Imam Shafi'i didn't know that it was authentic. Imam Shafi'i, what do you mean didn't know? Remember, a lot of those hadith, Imam Shafi'i died 205 Hijriya. Imam Shafi'i died 205 Hijriya. So therefore, yet Imam al-Tirmidhi died around 330, maybe 320. Don't take my word for it. So we're 310, around that area, okay? And Imam al-Tirmidhi, basically whether you're talking about al-Bukhari, you're talking about Muslim as well, you're talking about all those scholars in hadith, or let's call it the hadith revolution, basically, to combine all those hadith and make sure that we have those in track. We have those basically recorded. We have those basically tracing all those hadith. And Imam Shafi'i didn't have that. Imam Shafi'i died 205 year Hijriya. He didn't have those resources at the time. And he said, let's see, look at the subtitle. وفي ذلك يقول إن كان يثبت أي حديث إن كان يثبت, which is حديث بروع, فلا حجة في قول أحد دون النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Stop right there. This is a mic drop right there. He said, if hadith buru', that is, if that any hadith is proven that she would have the right for inheritance and have the right for mahr, then no one would have the right to say anything beyond what the Prophet ﷺ had said. That's it. So what does that mean? This is a key thing for us to know, that whether Shafi'i, whether Malik, whether Ahmad, whether Sufyan al-Thawri, whether Sufyan ibn Uyayna, whatever it is, whomever it is, once we trace back and we were capable of researching and finding an authentic hadith in regards to any matter, that's the end. No words go beyond the words of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, and that's why Tirmidhi himself, he basically نقل الترمذي مقالة الشافعي هذه ثم قال وروي عن الشافعي أنه رجع بمصر بعد عن هذا القول وقال بحديث بروع بنت واشق. And Tirmidhi, he basically took that quote and he said, and it was narrated upon الشافعي that he basically had left his previous fatwa that the woman does not have the right to get inheritance and get the right for mahr when he moved to Egypt, and of course, and said based on hadith Buru' bint Washiq. What is the hadith Buru' bint Washiq? Hadith Buru' bint Washiq is basically when Ma'qal ibn Sinan, he said, we had a woman in our tribe or in our community, and her name was Buru' bint Washiq, and the Prophet ﷺ basically had given her the right to get that inheritance and also get that and also get that mahr. Okay, let's see. Al-Mawardi, just an idea. Al-Mawardi is a Shafi'i scholar, and Al-Mawardi, he wasn't just any scholar, because Al-Mawardi was also in the government. He was actually affiliated with the government, and at the same time, so he was like a qadi and in the government, and basically had all those cases basically come to him. Speaking of government, there were a number of different scholars that were in the government, meaning holding a formal position. And just like, for example, we're talking about Abu Yusuf holding a formal position, and sometimes holding formal positions, it may sometimes be something that can be a place of suspicion for some, and for others, it can be an endorsement. Let me explain how this can be an endorsement. It can be an endorsement because when you are a person working in the government, then you are officially getting all those cases coming to your office. And this isn't that every once in a while you're getting a case. When you work in a certain field, those cases, you are hired to basically deal with these cases, then therefore we would know that you held that position for a certain amount of time, and that you were on duty to just deal with these kind of positions. So when you say Al-Mawardi was a person that held a government office, a government position, to be a qadi and to be a legal figure, kind of think of him as like a judge or maybe a lawyer, basically dealing with that, at first hand, that actually gives me an endorsement. So all those cases that he was writing and on duty, basically, in that Al-Hawi, which is a very big, maybe I could show you that actually. Maybe I could show you this right there, Al-Hawi Al-Mawardi, and you will see it right there, just give you an idea. Al-Mawardi, here we go. All right, maybe we can show you what we're talking about, and let's see if I can get something that can give you an idea. Okay, you're not going to give me it. Here we go. This is it. There's Al-Hawi Al-Kabir right there. Look at how big it is. This one's actually in 19 volumes. Okay. We could look at that, how big it is. Okay. All right. So definitely, and it wasn't his only book, by the way. So let's see. وقد أطال القول في بيان ضعف الحديث. Yet, of course, Al-Mawardi, even though on duty and all of that, but he still went in lots of details in trying to prove that hadith Buru' bint Washiq was actually not authentic. But I want you to see one thing. What is important about all this debate? What's important about all this debate is to see how one madhab can even have an internal dispute in regards to one shred of evidence, one piece of evidence. And that's why you could see in Nawawi also a Shafi'i madhab. You could say within that madhab, Nawawi, although Al-Mawardi had worked so hard to actually prove that that hadith is not authentic, which is the hadith of Buru' bint Washiq, but of course Nawawi did not want to support that, and Nawawi had basically rejected al-Mawardi and said, no, actually, the rajih, or what is preponderant, is that the woman, and I want you to look at this one, in Nawawi, whenever there's a dispute in the Shafi'i madhab, we would go to two people in the Shafi'i madhab whenever there is a dispute, what really is the preponderant opinion in the Shafi'i madhab. We would go for a Rafi'i or we would go for a Nawawi. But if a Nawawi says a statement that this is what a Shafi'i madhab rules, that's final. That's final. Okay? So just keep that one in mind. It is final when Nawawi says it, and Nawawi had said, and in fact, the preponderant in the Shafi'i madhab is that the wife would basically, or at least this woman who her husband died before she was even intimate with him. So therefore, Nawawi said she would have the right to get the mahr, would have the right to get the inheritance, and he said, وفي ذلك يقول الراجح ترجيح الوجوب. He said, what is preponderant is basically what is obligatory is going to be what is mandatory upon us to basically consider as preponderant. In other words, we don't consider our opinion and how we want to perhaps maybe support or be patriotic to one particular person's opinion, but we're supposed to be patriotic to the evidence and certainly supporting the evidence as long as I have an authentic hadith. That's supposed to be my place of go. That's supposed to be my place of centricity. And therefore, ولا اعتبار بما قيل في إسناده. And therefore, anything that basically wanted to disregard in the chain of narration and all of that, then therefore they said, we're not going to be considering that. And we're going to be considering that that hadith is actually authentic. And therefore, that's going to be our state of reference. Okay? And therefore, look at this one. وَلَا وَجْهَ لِلْقَوْلِ الْآخِرِ مَعْ صِحَّةِ الْحَدِيثِ. And there's no point of view for the other opinion when I would have a hadith that is proven to be authentic. Look at that one. This is right there, Rawdat al-Talibin for Nawawi, basically saying, you know what? Our centricity is supposed to be around an authentic hadith and not necessarily hadith or somebody's opinion. Just keep that one in mind. Okay. Any questions about that one? I know it's 11:52 right now, but we're going to continue tomorrow. Remember, we have to finish a lot of this. Well, how much is left? Hold on, let me see what we're looking at. Let's just do this one. No, not too bad. Just let's do this one. Okay. What about half the mahr? And we're talking about mahr musamma, meaning it's assigned mahr. Okay. If a divorce were to happen and before intimacy, and when in a situation there was a khalwa sahiha, the private moment that they had, then in that situation, she would basically have half the mahr that was assigned. So let's say they said $30,000 of mahr, she would get $50,000, even though they were not intimate, and due to khalwa sahiha, they were together, I don't know, they went to some forest, but she said he wasn't intimate, and we basically had an OB confirm that her hymen is not ruptured, and we basically had all of that proven, and then in that situation, we would say, well, she would still get half the mahr. And there's no differences of opinions between scholars. Why? Because the ayah says, وَإِن طَلَّقْتُمُوهُنَّ مِن قَبْلِ أَن تَمَسُّوهُنَّ وَقَدْ فَرَضْتُمْ لَهُنَّ فَرِيضَةً فَنِصْفُ مَا فَرَضْتُمْ إِلَّا أَن يَعْفُونَ أَوْ يَعْفُوَ الَّذِي بِيَدِهِ عُقْدَةُ النِّكَاحِ. The ayah was straightforward. If you were to divorce the women before you were intimate with them, and I want to look at this one. When it says before you were intimate with them, what is that supposed to mean? Well, this is basically to let us know that the ayah was basically using this type of adab in speaking about in speaking about the relationships between husband and wife. Sorry, I lost the page basically went out. Hold on, we're gonna get back to our page if we can find it. This is it. Here we go. All right. فَنِصْفُ مَا فَرَضْتُمْ. So half of what the assigned mahr was, unless they chose to forgive, and of course, who would be the person to forgive? So إِلَّا أَن يَعْفُونَ, يَعْفُونَ meaning the women, unless the woman said, I don't want the mahr. Or أو يعفو الذي بيده عقدة النكاح, or the one that basically had عقدة النكاح. What is عقدة النكاح? Like the one that had the power to speak on behalf of that woman. Could be her father, could be her brother, could be the person that's speaking on her behalf. Basically, if they were to decide that, yeah, we're gonna basically let go and we're gonna forgive you, that's it. You don't have to pay half the mahr, then that's okay. Okay. So just to mention that one. All right. And this is also the madhab Hanbali right there. Let's see. والصواب من القول أن كل فرقة جاءت من قبل كل فرقة not فرقة but فرقة جاءت من قبل الزوج قبل الوطء والخلوة فإن الزوج يستحق بها نصف المهر. So he basically said, this is talking about kullu furqa, al-furqa meaning any separation that the husband is responsible for, and it was before intimacy, and there was a khalwa, then in that situation, the wife would have half the mahr if it was mentioned. Yet, let's say, if the woman was the cause, what if the woman was the cause of whether we're talking about fasakh? Or the woman, let's say, became Muslim, and there was, this is talking about what type of furqa are we talking about that the husband would be responsible for, such as divorce or a fasakh that the qadi might have actually, the qadi might have ruled, but as a result of the husband's fault, basically, or ila. Ila is when the husband says, you are, oh no, ila, I basically made a yameen. That's what ila is. Or il'an, basically accused her of cheating on him. Or il'inna, or later discovered that he had erectile dysfunction. Or probably left Islam because he refused to become Muslim. Then in that situation, or had done some kind of an act where he was perhaps maybe committed zina with some of her relatives. We're speaking about some of her relatives, such as the mother, or even her sisters. So basically a type of incest. Well, no, incest would be different. So this is basically dealing with any of her usul, meaning her mother, her grandmother, in a zina relationship, or committing zina with any of her furu', maybe her daughter, or even her sisters. So in that situation, she would have the right for half the mahr. And that's the Hanbali view. Okay. Tomorrow, inshallah, we're going to talk about when she would lose all the mahr. Okay, so the whole thing is basically forfeited, I guess. Okay, so inshallah, if there are any questions today, go ahead, my friends. I know we kind of went in lots of details, but go ahead. Khadija, go ahead. I can see Ustaz Umayya as well. You both unmuted yourselves. That's okay. No one wants to say anything? Okay, let me then, I guess,